There is a city in Holland where the canals catch the light of late afternoon and hold it trembling against walls of red and brown brick. The year is 1619, and the city is Leiden, a place of winding waterways, of university spires, of market squares where the smell of fresh bread mingles with the sharper scent of wool, dye, and tallow. Let us go there now. Let us walk along the Rappenberg Canal in the golden hour before supper, when the day's labor is ending and the city exhales. Leiden is a city built on cloth. For centuries, its fortune has risen and fallen with the quality of its wool, and even now, in summer, the air carries the faint lanolin smell of raw fleece being sorted and combed in workshops along the narrow lanes. If you listen closely, you can hear the rhythmic knock of looms behind closed shutters, a heartbeat that runs beneath all the other sounds of the city. The clatter of wooden shoes on cobblestones, the cry of a cheese seller in the market, the distant tolling of the Peterskirk bell marking the hour. It is in one of these workshops, down a side street not far from the great church, that we find Thomas Marsh. He is a man in his middle 50s with broad hands and a quiet face, and he stands at a wool-combing station near the window where the light is best. His work is simple in description but demanding in practice. He draws raw wool through iron-toothed combs again and again, straightening the fibers until they run parallel and clean, ready for the spinners and weavers to transform into cloth. It is slow, patient work. The teeth of the combs must be heated over a small charcoal pot to ease the fibers loose, and the room smells of warmth and animal and the faintest trace of smoke. Thomas has done this work for more than 10 years now, ever since the congregation came to Leiden from Amsterdam, and before that from England. His hands remember a different kind of labor. The open fields of Nottinghamshire, the heavy clay soil, the rhythm of seasons on a farm. But that was another life. He was a younger man then, and England was a place where worshipping as his conscience told him could cost him his freedom. So he left. They all left, the families of the Scrooby congregation, crossing to Holland in search of the one thing they could not find at home, the right to pray as they believed God intended. And they found it here in Leiden. The Dutch were generous in that way. They did not share the English congregation's particular faith, but they did not persecute them for it either. The city granted them permission to settle, and settle they did, finding work in the cloth trades, in carpentry, in tailoring, in printing. They built homes, they raised children, they buried their dead in a foreign country, and learned, slowly, to call it home. But now, something is shifting. Thomas can feel it in the congregation the way a farmer feels a change in the weather before the sky shows any sign. There is talk, careful, quiet talk, of leaving again, of a voyage across the Atlantic to a place so distant and unknown that even speaking of it feels like stepping off the edge of the world. Thomas draws the wool through the comb and says nothing about it. Not yet. Let us leave him for a moment and step outside into the lane and follow it to a small house with a yard no bigger than a bedsheet, where Agnes Marsh is kneeling in the last of the afternoon light. Agnes is Thomas's wife, a woman of nearly 50, with a calm, weathered face and hands that are always busy. Just now, those hands are in the earth. She keeps a garden here, if you can call it a garden, this modest patch of soil between the house wall and the neighbor's fence, and in it she tends a collection of plants that would seem unremarkable to a passer-by, but that Agnes prizes as dearly as coin. There is rosemary, which she brought as a cutting from England years ago, wrapped in damp cloth for the crossing. There is chamomile, which the Dutch neighbors taught her to brew for sleeplessness. There is comfrey for poultices, and feverfew for headaches, and a small, struggling lavender bush that she talks to on cold mornings as though encouraging a reluctant child. Agnes is the person her neighbors come to when a baby has colic or a cough will not clear. She is not a physician. There is no such title for a woman in her world. But she has a knowledge of plants and remedies passed down from her mother and her mother's mother, and she has added to it year by year with what she has learned in this foreign city. She keeps her seeds in small cloth pouches, each one labeled in her careful hand, and she stores her dried herbs in jars on a shelf above the hearth. It is a small pharmacy, and it is hers. She hears the door and looks up. Thomas is home. He bends to kiss the top of her head, and she can tell from the set of his shoulders that there has been more talk at the workshop, more talk of leaving. She does not ask. She will let him come to it in his own time. For now she brushes the soil from her knees and goes inside to start the evening meal, and the smell of onions frying in butter soon fills the little house and drifts out into the lane, where it joins all the other supper-time smells of Leiden settling into evening. Not far from the Marsh household, in a room above a narrow alley that the English congregation calls Choir Lane, a man named Elias Holbrook is cleaning a type case by candlelight. Elias is in his late 40s, lean and precise in his movements, with ink stains on his fingers that never entirely wash away. For the past 2 years he has worked as a compositor, a typesetter for the congregation's small and clandestine printing press. The press belongs, in practical terms, to the congregation's elder and to a wealthy sympathizer who funds the operation, but it is Elias who does the daily work of setting type. Letter by letter, word by word, he assembles the metal characters into lines, locks them into the frame, and prepares the pages for printing. The work requires literacy, precision, and a certain temperament, the willingness to sit for hours in concentration, arranging tiny pieces of lead into words that carry enormous weight. The pamphlets they print here are not innocent things. They are arguments for religious liberty, critiques of the English Church's authority, defenses of the right to worship according to conscience. They are printed in Leiden and smuggled back to England and Scotland, where they circulate in secret among those who share the congregation's beliefs. It is dangerous work. The English ambassador has already taken notice. The Dutch authorities have been pressured to investigate. Elias knows that the press's days are numbered, that the type he cleans tonight may soon be seized, but for now, in this quiet hour, there is only the soft click of metal letters being sorted back into their compartments, and the smell of ink and paper and candle wax, and the particular satisfaction of a man who believes that words, arranged with care, can change the shape of the world. Elias is also the congregation's informal record keeper. He keeps a ledger of births, deaths, marriages, and agreements, a book of the community's life written in his careful, even hand. He takes this responsibility seriously. To record a thing, he believes, is to honor it. To write down a name is to say, this person was here, and they mattered. It is this same seriousness, the same conviction, that makes Elias both admirable and, at times, difficult to be near. He is a man who knows what he believes and why, and he does not always leave room for others to arrive at their own answers. His faith is genuine and deeply felt, but it has a rigidity to it, like a bone that has healed strong but inflexible. His daughter Susanna knows this better than anyone. Susanna Holbrook is 22 years old, and she sits at a spinning wheel in the room below her father's workshop, drawing wool into yarn with a rhythm so practiced it requires almost no thought. She was a child of 8 when her parents brought her to Leiden, and she barely remembers England. A few images, mostly, a green field, the sound of church bells different from these Dutch ones, the feeling of her mother's hand, her mother who died here in Leiden when Susanna was 14. The city she knows is this one. She speaks Dutch as easily as English. She knows the market vendors by name, knows which baker makes the best rye bread, knows the sound of the Peterskerk bell so well that she can tell the hour without looking up from her wheel. And now her father tells her they may leave. Susanna does not argue with him about it. She has learned that arguing with Elias is like arguing with a wall, not because he is unkind, but because his certainty is so complete that her doubts seem to slide off it without purchase. He speaks of the voyage as a calling, a divine purpose. He speaks of the children of the congregation growing too Dutch, losing their English ways, their faith diluted by the tolerant, secular atmosphere of Leiden. He speaks of a new world where they can build something pure. Susanna listens, and she turns her wheel, and she wonders privately what she believes. She was raised in this faith. She knows the prayers, the psalms, the rhythms of worship, but she has also grown up in a city where people of many faiths and no particular faith live side by side, and she has noticed that goodness does not seem to belong exclusively to any one group. The Dutch woman who taught Agnes about chamomile tea was not a separatist. The old man who sells cheese in the market and always gives Susanna an extra slice is not part of any English congregation. Kindness, she has observed, is wider than doctrine. She does not say this to her father. She is not sure she could explain it even if she tried. It is not a rejection of what she was taught. It is more like a question that she has not yet found the right words for. And so she sits, and she spins, and she watches the late light move across the floor, and she wonders what kind of life is waiting for her across an ocean she cannot imagine. Summer deepens, and the talk in the congregation grows louder, more urgent. Not everyone will go. The pastor will stay behind with the larger portion of the community, and only those who can settle their affairs and are strong enough for the journey will make the crossing. The rest will follow later if God wills it. This means that families will be divided. Friends who have worshiped together for a decade will embrace for what may be the last time. The weight of this choosing settles over the congregation like a low sky before rain. Thomas and Agnes decide together, as they have decided everything in their long marriage, quietly in the kitchen after supper. Agnes watches Thomas's face as he speaks. He is not a man given to dramatic declarations. He says simply that he is old enough to know that waiting for certainty is the same as waiting forever, and that if the congregation is going, he will go with it, because the congregation is his family and has been since Scrooby. Agnes nods. She has already begun, in her mind, to sort through her herb jars, calculating which seeds will survive a sea crossing and which must be left behind. Elias, for his part, has no hesitation. The press has been shut down. the type seized by Dutch authorities under pressure from the English ambassador, and with it his livelihood and his sense of purpose. He sees the voyage as a door opening precisely when another has closed. He tells Susanna that this is providence, and she can see in his eyes the absolute belief that carries him, and she wishes she could feel it too. She agrees to go because she cannot imagine being left behind without him, but the agreement sits unevenly in her chest, like a stone she has swallowed. Let us imagine those final weeks in Leiden. Picture the small, practical acts of leaving, Agnes digging up her rosemary bush and wrapping the roots in damp linen, knowing it will probably not survive, but unable to leave it behind. Thomas giving away his wool-combing tools to a Dutch colleague, the two men shaking hands without quite meeting each other's eyes. Elias packing his record book into an oilskin pouch, the only possession he truly cannot do without. Susanna walking through the market one last time, memorizing the faces of the vendors, the way the canal looks at this particular hour, the sound of Dutch spoken in the cadence she has known since childhood. There is a gathering the night before the departure, in the home near the Pieterskirk, where the congregation has met for worship. The room is warm and crowded, those who are leaving and those who are staying pressed together, and there are prayers spoken, and someone begins a psalm, one of the old ones, familiar as breathing, and the singing is ragged because so many voices are thick with feeling. The pastor speaks quietly to each person who is departing. He speaks of courage and of the grace that sustains those who walk in faith even when the path ahead is dark. He does not pretend that this is easy. He does not pretend that everyone will meet again. Thomas stands near the back of the room with Agnes beside him, and he listens to the psalm, and he thinks of the fields of Nottinghamshire and the lanes of Leiden, and he understands that he is about to lose a home for the second time in his life. But Agnes's hand is in his, and it is warm, and it is enough. On a July morning in 1620, the departing members of the congregation board a canal boat at Leiden for the journey to Delfshaven, where the ship Speedwell waits to carry them to England. From there they will join a larger vessel, the Mayflower, for the Atlantic crossing. The canal journey takes about 7 hours. Let us be there on that boat, drifting south through the flat green landscape of Holland. The water is brown and slow. Cows stand in meadows that stretch to the horizon. Windmills turn in the distance, their great arms catching the breeze. The sky is enormous, that particular Dutch sky that seems to take up more of the world than sky has any right to. On the boat, the travelers are quiet. Some pray. Some watch the landscape pass. Children lean over the rail and trail their fingers in the water. Susanna sits near the bow and watches Leiden's spires grow small behind her, and she does not cry, but something in her chest tightens and does not let go. At Delfshaven, there is a final night together, a meal shared with those who have come to see them off. In the morning, with the tide, they board the Speedwell, and the people on the quay weep openly, and the people on the ship weep too, and the sound of it, that particular sound of people who love each other saying goodbye without knowing if it is forever, carries across the harbor water. But ships do not wait for grief to finish. The sails catch the wind, and the Speedwell moves, and Delfshaven becomes a line of rooftops, and then a smudge, and then nothing at all. The weeks that follow are complicated. The Speedwell proves leaky, and twice the ships must turn back to the English coast for repairs. Finally, at the port of Southampton, the decision is made. The Speedwell will be abandoned. All passengers and supplies will be consolidated onto the Mayflower alone. Some families must be left behind for lack of space. There are tearful partings, hurried rearrangements, the chaos of plans collapsing and reforming. It is at Southampton that two new figures enter our story. The first is Hugh Calder, a cooper, a maker and repairer of wooden barrels, casks, and tubs. Hugh is in his late 20s, broad-shouldered and quiet, with the careful hands of a man whose trade requires precision. He was hired by the merchant investors to join the voyage, and he is not part of the Leiden congregation. He is what they call a stranger, a term that sounds harsher than it is meant, though it does draw a line. The saints are those who share the faith. The strangers are everyone else. Hugh is everyone else. He signed on for his own reasons, and they are simple enough. A year ago, his young wife died of a fever that swept through their neighborhood in Southampton. The house they shared became unbearable. Every room held her absence, and when the opportunity came to join a venture to the new world, Hugh saw it not as a calling, but as a door out of a place he could no longer stand. He does not speak of this to anyone. He simply shows up with his tools, the crows, the adze, the draw knife, the hoops and staves, and he gets to work inspecting the Mayflower's barrels, because barrels are what keep food dry and water drinkable and beer from going sour, and without sound barrels, no one survives an ocean crossing. The second is a boy. Ned Fallow is about 13, thin and watchful, with the wary alertness of someone who has learned to make himself useful before anyone thinks to send him away. He is an indentured servant, bound to work for a family in exchange for his passage, his food, and the vague promise of a future. Where he comes from, exactly, is unclear even to him. London, probably. A parish workhouse, possibly. He does not talk about it. What matters to Ned is what is in front of him, the ship, the work, the chance. He has been assigned to the Marsh household, and when Agnes first sees him, this narrow-shouldered boy with his cap pulled low, she simply says, "Well then," and hands him a biscuit and a cup of beer, and tells him where he will sleep. It is the most ordinary gesture in the world, and Ned receives it like a man dying of thirst receives water. On the 6th of September, 1620, the Mayflower departs from Plymouth, England, with 102 passengers aboard. Let us go with them. Imagine the between decks, which is where the passengers live. It is a space roughly 60 feet long and 24 feet wide, with a ceiling so low that a tall man cannot stand upright. There are no windows, no private rooms. Families have hung curtains and erected thin wooden partitions to mark their small territories, but there is no true privacy, and every sound, every cough, every whispered prayer, every restless child belongs to everyone. The smell is the first thing you would notice. Bilge water from below, damp wool, tallow candles that give a greasy, unsteady light, salt pork and the vinegar used to preserve it, and beneath everything the human smell of too many bodies in too small a space because there is no way to properly wash and the same clothes are worn day after day. But there is also this. The sound of the sea. It is everywhere, above, below, around. The creak and groan of the ship's timbers, the rush of water along the hull, the deep percussion of waves striking the bow. At first it is frightening, This reminder that only a few inches of oak separate you from an ocean whose depth you cannot fathom. But after a time, if you let it, the sound becomes a kind of company. It is always there, always moving, and in its constancy there is something almost soothing, the way a heartbeat is soothing to a child held close. The days develop a rhythm. Meals are prepared from rations, hardtack biscuits, dried fish, salted pork, cheese when it lasts, beer to drink because the fresh water has gone brackish. The food is monotonous and inadequate, but it keeps body and soul together, and the act of sharing a meal in the dim light of the between decks becomes a small daily ritual, a way of marking time when all the usual markers, sunrise, sunset, the shape of the land, have been taken away. Thomas finds his place in this rhythm. He is too old for the physical labor of sailing, but he is steady, and steadiness matters. He helps organize the storage of provisions. He settles small disputes between families whose nerves are frayed. He sits with those who are frightened and does not try to talk them out of their fear, but simply stays beside them, a solid presence in the swaying dark. It is not a dramatic contribution, but it is the kind that holds a community together when everything else is trying to pull it apart. Agnes, meanwhile, has discovered that her herb knowledge is needed sooner than she expected. Seasickness is universal in the first weeks, and she brews what remedies she can from the small store of dried herbs she brought: ginger root for nausea, chamomile for the anxiety that makes it worse, peppermint leaves steeped in warm water. Her supplies are limited, and she cannot cure anyone, but the act of offering a warm cup and a kind word is itself a kind of medicine. People begin to seek her out, and she does not turn anyone away, not even the strangers who are not part of the congregation. Illness, she has noticed, does not ask what church you belong to. It is through this work that Agnes first meets Samuel Wynne, the colony's physician and surgeon. Samuel is a quiet man in his late 30s with a thoughtful face and tired eyes. He trained himself in medicine through books and apprenticeship, and he carries a small chest of surgical instruments and a larger knowledge of anatomy and disease than anyone else aboard. He is also the congregation's deacon, a man of faith. Though his faith has a searching quality to it, he believes, but he also observes. And when what he observes does not match what he has been told to believe, he does not look away. Samuel and Agnes begin to work together without any formal arrangement. She brings her herbs. He brings his instruments and his diagnoses. She knows which plant sees a fever. He knows when a fever is dangerous and when it will pass on its own. They develop a quiet understanding, the way two musicians who have never played together can sometimes find a shared rhythm on the first note. Neither of them knows yet how much they will need each other in the months to come. Hugh, the cooper, keeps to himself for the most part. He checks the barrels daily, tapping the staves to listen for cracks, tightening hoops that have loosened in the damp, replacing bungs that have worked free. It is unglamorous work, but essential, and the crew respects him for it, even if the saints regard him with a polite distance. He does not mind. He is accustomed to being on the outside of things, but he notices Susanna. It would be difficult not to. She is one of the younger women aboard, and she has a habit of coming up to the between-decks hatchway whenever the crew allows it, standing at the edge of the opening with her face turned toward whatever light and air come through. She does not speak to him directly, not at first. But one afternoon, when the sea is calm and Hugh is working on a barrel near the hatch, she asks him what he is listening for when he taps the wood. He explains the difference in sound between a solid stave and a cracked one, the way moisture changes the pitch, the importance of a tight seal. He speaks about it the way craftsmen do, with an unself-conscious precision that has its own kind of beauty. Susanna listens and asks another question and another. It is a small conversation, entirely practical, and it means nothing in particular. But it is the beginning of something. A door, opening a crack. Ned, the boy, is everywhere and nowhere. He runs errands for the Marsh household. He fetches water, carries biscuit rations, holds a candle for Agnes when she tends to someone who is ill. He is quick and observant and almost painfully eager to be useful. Thomas notices this, the way the boy watches everything, the way he anticipates what is needed before being asked. One evening, Thomas shows Ned how to check a rope for fraying, and the boy listens with a concentration so intense it is almost fierce. Thomas does not make a fuss about it. He simply includes the boy, naturally, the way you include someone who belongs. And Ned, who has rarely been included in anything, feels something unfamiliar settle in his chest. He does not have a word for it yet. Weeks pass, the storms come, North Atlantic gales that turn the between decks into a bruising chaos of sliding cargo and terrified passengers. During one particularly violent storm, a beam in the midships cracks, and for a terrible hour the question is whether the Mayflower can continue at all. But someone produces a great iron screw, a jack brought from Holland, and the beam is raised and braced, and the ship holds, and the journey continues. And then, on the 9th of November, after 66 days at sea, someone on deck shouts the word that every passenger has been dreaming of. Land. The land they have found is not where they intended to go. They had aimed for the Hudson River, far to the south, but the winds and the currents and the dangerous shoals off Cape Cod have brought them here instead, to a curving arm of sand and scrub pine on the coast of New England, in a harbor they do not yet have a name for. It is November. The air has a sharpness that surprises them, even those who remember English winters. The trees on shore, what trees there are, stand bare against a sky that is enormous and pale. The water in the harbor is steel gray. There are no buildings, no roads, no chimney smoke, no church bells. There is only the land itself, vast and indifferent and wild. Let us stay with them as they anchor the Mayflower in this harbor and begin the slow, difficult work of deciding where to build. Exploring parties go ashore in the shallop, the small sailing boat that has been stored in the between decks for the entire crossing. They search for fresh water, cleared land, a defensible position. It takes weeks. The weather turns colder, snow falls. The passengers wait on the ship, crowded and restless, and the sickness that began as a few coughs in the between decks begins to spread. In mid-December, they choose their site, a hill near a harbor with cleared fields and a freshwater brook. The land was once a village of the Wampanoag people, a place called Patuxet, abandoned some years before after a devastating illness swept through the community. The fields are already clear, the soil, they hope, will accept their seeds. They call the place Plymouth after the English port they departed from, and they begin to build. Building in December is punishing work. The ground is frozen. The wind off the harbor cuts through every layer of clothing. The men fell trees and dragged them to the building site, shaping timbers with axes and saws. The houses will be built in the English style, oak frames joined with wooden pins, walls of wattle and daub, roofs thatched with marsh grass. But it is slow going. The men are weakened from the crossing, poorly nourished, and many are already ill. The first structure completed is the common house, a single room, roughly 20 feet square, that will serve as a storehouse, a meeting place, and very soon a hospital. By January, the sickness has taken hold in earnest. It moves through the colony with a terrible steadiness, fever, coughing, a wasting weakness that pulls people down and does not let them rise. There is no single name for what ails them. It is scurvy from the long months of salt meat and no fresh food. It is pneumonia from the cold and wet. It is the accumulated exhaustion of bodies that have been pushed beyond their limits. And here is where we must speak of what happened that winter, gently, because it is part of the story and cannot be left out. But it is not where the story lives. The story lives in what the living did for each other. Agnes Marsh moves into the common house. She brings her herbs, what remains of them after the crossing, and she brings herself, her steady hands, her calm voice, her willingness to sit beside a person who is suffering and simply be there. She brews teas from the chamomile and ginger she has left. She makes poultices from comfrey. She washes faces, changes bedding, holds cups of warm water to cracked lips. She does this day after day through January and February, when sometimes 2 or 3 people die in a single day and the living barely have the strength to tend the dead. Samuel Wynne works beside her. He has his surgical instruments, his knowledge of the body, his ability to diagnose and to decide. This person can be saved with care. This one is beyond what medicine can do. The decisions are terrible, and they accumulate. Samuel does not speak of them, but Agnes sees the weight in his face, the way his hands tremble slightly when he thinks no one is looking. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, she sets a cup of chamomile tea beside him without a word, and he wraps both hands around it and closes his eyes, and for a moment the two of them are simply 2 tired people sitting together in a room where the firelight flickers and the sick breathe in the dark. They do not talk about whether God has a plan for this. They do not debate the purpose of suffering. They work because work is what is in front of them, and in the work something grows between them, not romance, not even friendship exactly, but a partnership forged in shared duty, a recognition that they are each doing the hardest thing they have ever done, and they are doing it together. Thomas, meanwhile, is one of the few who does not fall seriously ill, and this fact transforms him. He becomes the colony's quiet engine. He carries water. He chops wood for the fires. He helps the weaker men with the building. He organizes watches at night when the darkness is so complete that you cannot see your hand in front of your face, and the only sound is the wind and the coughing from the common house. He does not do this because he is brave or because he is strong. He is neither particularly, but because he is there, and he is able, and there is no one else. And he looks after Ned. The boy has taken ill, a fever that keeps him curled on a pallet in the common house, shivering, his face flushed and his eyes too bright. Thomas sits beside him in the evenings after the day's work. He does not say much. He peels the bark off a stick, or mends a piece of cloth, or simply sits with his hands folded, and his presence is the thing. One night, when the fever is at its worst and Ned is muttering in a half-dream, Thomas places his rough wool-comber's hand on the boy's forehead, and it is cool and heavy and real, and Ned quiets under it like an animal calmed by touch. Agnes tends to Ned too, of course. She is the one who brings him broth and monitors his breathing and adjusts the blanket when he kicks it off. She calls him lad without thinking about it, the way she would speak to a child of her own. And one morning, when the fever has finally broken and Ned opens his eyes to find Agnes sitting beside him, sorting dried herbs into pouches, he says something he has never said to anyone. He says, "Thank you." Agnes looks at him. "You are welcome," she says, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Now drink this." Elias faces the winter differently. His faith, which was so sure in Leiden, meets its most difficult test here, not in the cold or the hunger, but in the helplessness. He is a man of words, a man who believes that ideas can change the world. And now he is in a place where words change nothing. The sickness does not care about his convictions. The frozen ground does not yield to his certainty. His record book, which he has carried across the ocean in its oilskin pouch, becomes a book of losses. Name after name, date after date, a catalogue of the dead that grows longer each week. He does not lose his faith. That would be too simple. What happens is more nuanced. His faith shifts. It softens at the edges. He begins to notice, with a kind of reluctant admiration, that the people who are doing the most good in this crisis are not necessarily the most devout. Hugh the cooper, who does not pray, spends hours in the freezing cold repairing barrels so that the dwindling food supply stays dry. Samuel the physician, whose faith is full of questions, works himself to exhaustion caring for the sick. Agnes, whose relationship to God is more garden than cathedral, rooted in the practical, the earthly, the green and growing, is the one person who seems to know what to do when all the prayers have been said and the dying continues. Elias watches, and he records, and something inside him begins to change, though he would not yet call it change. He would call it understanding. Let us stay with Hugh for a while, here in the depths of winter. He has built himself a routine, and routine is what saves him. Each morning, before the light is fully up, he inspects the colony's stores, the barrels of salted meat, the casks of beer, which are running dangerously low, the containers of meal and dried peas. He checks the seals, taps the staves, listens for the telltale hollow sound that means a crack, a leak, a loss they cannot afford. Then he turns to the building. Hugh is not a carpenter by trade, but a cooper's skills overlap. He understands wood, how it behaves when it is wet, when it is cold, how to shape it and join it so that it holds. He works alongside the other men, framing houses, splitting clapboards, cutting thatch. His hands are raw and cracked from the cold, and at night they ache so badly that he sleeps with them pressed against his stomach for warmth. He does not complain. It is not in his nature, and besides, there is no one he is close enough to complain to. The saints are kind to him. They include him at meals. They nod to him at the building site. But there is a boundary, invisible and unspoken, between those who share the faith and those who do not. Hugh understands this. He does not resent it. He simply occupies the space he has been given and fills it with work. But the boundary is thinner than anyone expected. Hardship has a way of dissolving distinctions. When there are only 50 people alive and the cold is trying to kill all of you, the question of whether you are a saint or a stranger begins to matter less than the question of whether you can swing an axe. Thomas is the first to cross the line. One afternoon, working side by side with Hugh on the frame of a new house, he begins to talk. Not about faith or doctrine, just talk. About Nottinghamshire, where he grew up. About the clay soil there, heavy as sin. About the first time he saw the ocean, at a harbor in England, and how it frightened him, all that water, all that movement, all that emptiness. Hugh listens, and after a while he talks too. About Southampton, where he learned his trade. About the particular satisfaction of finishing a barrel and filling it with water and watching it hold, not a single drop escaping. About the sound of the cooper's hammer, which he can pick out of any workshop noise the way a mother can pick out her child's voice in a crowd. They talk, and they work, and the house frame rises between them, and something that was not there before is there now. A connection built not on shared belief, but on shared labor and the ordinary human comfort of being known. It is Thomas who first invites Hugh to sit with the Marsh household at supper. Agnes sets out the meal, thin broth, a piece of hardtack, a precious slice of cheese, and Hugh sits among them, and Ned sits beside him. And for a few minutes the common house is not a hospital but a home, and the firelight is warm, and the food, however meager, is shared. Susanna is there too, because the Holbrook and Marsh families have drawn close during the winter, the way people do when the circle of the living grows smaller. She sits across from Hugh, and they do not speak much, but there is a quality to their silence that is different from the silence between strangers. It is the silence of two people who are aware of each other, who are paying attention, who are waiting, without urgency, without agenda, for whatever comes next. March comes, and with it the first breath of something that is not quite warmth, but is at least the memory of warmth. The days grow longer, the light changes, it is still thin and pale, but it lingers a little later each evening, and in that lingering there is a promise. The dying slows. It does not stop entirely, not yet, but the terrible pace of January and February eases, and the living begin to look up from the work of survival and notice for the first time the world around them, the harbor, the hill, the cleared fields where the old village once stood, the brook that runs fresh and cold down to the sea, the trees budding at their tips, impossibly delicate against the gray sky. And then, one day in March, a figure walks into the settlement. He is a tall man, and he greets them in English, broken, surprising English, and he says his name is Samoset. He is an Abenaki Sagamore from the north, who has learned the English language from fishermen and traders along the coast, and he has come to meet these new arrivals. The colonists are astonished. They offer him food and beer, and he stays the night, and when he leaves, he promises to return. He does return, and he brings others. Through Samoset, the colonists meet the Wampanoag people whose territory this is, and in the weeks that follow, a relationship begins to form, cautious, formal, mediated through translators and gifts, and the careful protocols of two peoples who do not yet know each other, but who have reason to try. We will not presume to tell the Wampanoag side of the story. It is theirs to tell, and it is far more complicated and far more costly than the English colonists understood at the time. But we can say what the colonists experienced, a generosity that they had not expected and did not entirely deserve. The Wampanoag taught them how to plant corn in the local way, in mounds with fish buried alongside the seed as fertilizer. They taught them which streams held the best fish, which plants were safe to eat, how to read the signs of weather in a landscape that was entirely foreign to English eyes. For Agnes, this is a revelation. She watches the planting method with the intense attention of a woman who has spent her life learning from the earth, and she understands immediately that the knowledge being shared is generations deep, a relationship with this particular soil, this particular climate that no English farmer could replicate without guidance. She is grateful and she is humbled, and she carries both feelings into her own garden plot, where she begins to plant the seeds she brought from Leiden alongside the corn and beans she has been taught to grow here. Samuel, too, is watching and learning. He notices the plants that grow wild in the meadows and along the brook, and he begins, tentatively, to catalog them, noting which ones the Wampanoag seem to use, asking questions when communication allows, adding to his understanding of medicine in this new place. He does not have the arrogance to believe that his English training is superior. He has just spent a winter watching half the colony die despite his best efforts. He is a man who has been broken open by failure, and into that opening, new knowledge flows. Spring unfolds slowly, the way spring does in a northern place, not all at once but in small, incremental gestures. A warmer afternoon, a green shoot in the field, the sound of bird song that was not there yesterday. Agnes plants her garden. It is a modest patch of earth near the house that Thomas has built. A real house now, with 4 walls and a thatched roof and a door that closes against the wind. She kneels in the soil and opens her cloth pouches one by one, and the seeds fall into the ground like small acts of faith. Rosemary, chamomile, feverfew, comfrey, parsley and thyme and sage. She does not know which of them will grow in this unfamiliar soil, and she does not try to predict. She plants them all, and she waters them, and she waits. Susanna helps her. The 2 women work side by side in the garden, and they do not talk about faith or philosophy or the meaning of the journey. They talk about soil, whether it needs more sand, more manure, more turning. They talk about rain and sun and the surprising warmth of this New England spring after the brutal winter. They talk about small things, and in the talking, a bond deepens between them that has nothing to do with the age difference or the fact that Agnes is a marsh and Susanna is a Holbrook. It is the bond of 2 people with their hands in the same earth, doing the same work, hoping for the same green shoots to appear. Hugh builds barrels for the harvest that does not yet exist. It is an act of optimism so practical that it barely registers as optimism at all. He simply looks at the fields where corn is being planted and calculates how many barrels will be needed to store it, and he begins. The wood in New England is different from what he knew in Southampton. The oak is harder, the grain tighter, and he has to adjust his techniques. But wood is wood, and Hugh's hands know what to do with it, and there is a deep satisfaction in the shaping of something useful from raw material. Each finished barrel is a small declaration. We are staying. We intend to be here when this corn is ripe. Ned follows Thomas everywhere. The boy has recovered from his illness, and he throws himself into the work of the settlement with a fierce energy that Thomas recognizes as gratitude expressed through labor. Ned learns to split clapboards. He learns to thatch a roof. He learns to check a fishing line and bait a hook and gut a cod with a single clean stroke of the knife. Thomas teaches him all of this, not through formal instruction, but through the simple method of doing it himself while Ned watches, and then handing the boy the tool and stepping back. One afternoon, working together on the fence that will protect the garden from deer, Thomas pauses and looks at Ned and says something that the boy will carry for the rest of his life. He says, "You do good work, lad. It is 5 words. It is everything." Elias, meanwhile, has taken out his record book again, but the entries have changed. Where once he recorded only losses, the names of the dead, the dates of burial, he now begins to record other things. The date the first corn was planted, the day the frame of the meeting house was raised, the names of the children who were born in the new settlement. He writes these things down with the same care he once gave to setting type, letter by letter, and he understands now that this is the same work, the work of saying, "This happened, and it mattered, and someone was here to witness it." He watches Susanna too, and what he sees surprises him. She is not the uncertain girl who boarded the ship in Southampton. She is becoming someone he does not entirely recognize, more capable, more confident, more herself. She speaks to Hugh the cooper without self-consciousness. She works in Agnes's garden with a competence that has nothing to do with doctrine. She has stopped waiting for someone to tell her what to believe and has begun quietly to discover what she knows. Elias does not say any of this to her. He is not that kind of father. But one evening, sitting outside the house in the long spring twilight, he tells her that the record book now has more pages of beginnings than of endings, and that this seems to him a good sign. Susanna looks at him, and for a moment they are simply a father and a daughter sitting together in the fading light, and the distance between them, which has always been there, built from his certainty and her doubt, feels a little smaller than it used to be. Summer in Plymouth is a surprise. After the winter's brutality, the warmth seems almost extravagant. The long, bright days, the meadows thick with wild flowers, the bay sparkling under a sky that stretches forever. The corn grows, the beans climb their poles, the squash spreads its great rough leaves across the mounds. Agnes's herbs send up green shoots that she greets each morning like old friends who have found their way home after a long absence. The settlement takes shape. There are now 2 rows of houses along the main street, small but solid, with gardens behind them and a palisade being built around the perimeter. The meeting house stands at the top of the hill, and on Sundays the community gathers there, saints and strangers together, though the strangers come for community rather than conviction, and this is quietly understood and quietly accepted. Samuel Wynne tends to the colony's health with a new sense of purpose. The worst is behind them. He can feel it, and the knowledge he is gathering about local plants and remedies gives him a cautious optimism that he has not felt since Leiden. He and Agnes still consult each other regularly. She brings him a plant she has found growing near the brook, and he examines it, and they discuss what it might be useful for, and these conversations have become one of the small pleasures of his days. He has begun to keep his own record, a log of treatments and outcomes, of herbs tried and their effects, and it sits alongside Elias's record book as a second kind of history, not of events, but of care. One afternoon, Elias visits Samuel in his workroom, a corner of the common house that has been partitioned off with a curtain. Elias has come about a splinter in his hand, but he stays to talk. The two men have always been friendly, but the winter has changed the nature of their friendship. Elias is less certain now, and certainty was always the thing that made him difficult to talk to. In its absence, there is room for genuine conversation. Samuel tells him about a remedy he learned from observing the wampanoag, a poultice made from the inner bark of a particular tree that seems to reduce swelling. He speaks about it with the careful enthusiasm of a man who is always learning, and Elias listens, and he realizes that this is what humility looks like in a man of science, not the absence of knowledge, but the willingness to be taught. Elias says something then that surprises them both. He says that he has been thinking about the difference between faith and certainty, and that he is no longer sure they are the same thing. Faith, he says, might be what remains when certainty is taken away, the willingness to continue walking even when you cannot see the path. Samuel considers this for a long moment, and then he says that this sounds very much like medicine. They look at each other, and something passes between them, an understanding, unspoken and imperfect but real. And then Samuel removes the splinter, and Elias thanks him, and they go back to their separate work. Autumn comes gently to Plymouth, the way it comes to all northern places, first a coolness in the morning air, then a deepening of color in the trees along the hills, then the unmistakable smell of ripe earth and turning leaves. The corn has grown tall, the barley has headed out, the beans hang heavy on their poles, and the squash glows orange in the fields. It is time to bring it in. The harvest is a communal effort. Everyone works, men, women, children. They move through the fields with sickles and baskets, cutting and gathering, and the air is full of dust and the sweet, dry smell of grain. Hugh's barrels are waiting, row upon row of them, and as the corn is shucked and dried, as the barley is threshed and winnowed, as the beans are shelled and sorted, the barrels fill one by one, and each one that is sealed is a small victory over the memory of winter. Agnes gathers her herbs too, the ones that survived the transplanting and the ones that grew wild, the native plants she has learned to recognize and use. She dries them in bundles hung from the rafters of the house, and the smell fills every room. Rosemary and chamomile and sage and the sharper, unfamiliar scents of the New World's plants. And Thomas breathes it in and thinks that this, finally, is what home smells like. Not the fields of Nottinghamshire, not the canals of Leiden. This. The governor declares a celebration. It will last 3 days. There will be feasting and games and the firing of muskets in salute, and the Wampanoag are invited. 90 of them come, led by their sachem, and they bring 5 deer as a contribution to the feast. The English provide wild fowl, duck and goose and perhaps turkey, along with fish and shellfish from the bay, and corn prepared in ways that the Wampanoag have taught them, and stews seasoned with Agnes's herbs, and bread made from the new grain. Let us be there on those 3 days in the autumn of 1621. Let us see the long tables set up outdoors, the food piled high, the children running between the houses. Let us hear the laughter. And there is laughter, real laughter, the sound of people who have survived something terrible and have come out the other side and are allowing themselves for just a few days to be glad. Thomas sits at the table beside Agnes and eats until he is full for the first time in months, and the fullness itself is astonishing, the simple animal pleasure of enough food. Ned sits beside him, eating steadily and seriously, the way a boy eats who remembers what it was like to be hungry. And Thomas looks at this boy, this thin, watchful boy who was placed in his household by circumstance, and who has become, through the alchemy of shared labor and shared suffering, something like a grandson, and he feels a tenderness so large that it sits in his chest like a second heart. Susanna and Hugh sit near each other at the feast. They have not declared anything. There has been no courtship in the formal sense, no conversation about intentions, but over the months, through the building and the planting and the 100 small interactions of life in a settlement of 50 people, something has grown between them that everyone can see. It is in the way Hugh saves her a seat without being asked. It is in the way Susanna brings him water during the harvest without being thanked. It is in the way they talk to each other, directly, honestly, with a mutual respect that has nothing to do with whether one is a saint and the other a stranger. That distinction, which seemed so important at Southampton, has become meaningless here. They are simply two people who have chosen each other quietly, without drama, in the way that people have always chosen each other when given enough time and enough shared work and enough honesty to see each other clearly. Elias watches his daughter from across the table, and he sees this, and he does not object. He could not have predicted it, his daughter and a stranger, a man who does not share their faith. But the winter has taught him something about the limits of prediction and the surprises that grace holds in store. He looks at Hugh and sees a man who has worked without ceasing, who has kept the colony stores dry and sound, who has treated every person in the settlement, saint and stranger alike, with the same steady, practical respect. Elias writes in his record book that night, and among the other entries, he notes the harvest and the feast and the number of barrels filled, and he adds in his careful hand a sentence that he would not have written a year ago: "We are become one people." Samuel sits a little apart, as is his way, and he watches the celebration with quiet satisfaction. The colony's physician has earned this rest. He has lost more patients than he will ever make peace with, but he has also saved lives, not through dramatic interventions, but through the daily, unglamorous work of care. He thinks of Agnes, who worked beside him through the worst of it, and of the teas she brewed, and the hands she held, and the calm she carried into every room she entered. He lifts his cup to her across the table, and she nods back, and between them is a bond that will last the rest of their lives. Not romantic, not familial, but something equally real. The bond of two people who walked through fire together and came out the other side still standing. The feast ends, and the autumn deepens, and Plymouth settles into the quieter rhythms of a community preparing for its second winter. But this winter will be different. The houses are built, the stores are full, the barrels hold corn and barley and dried fish and the last of the beer, and there are new barrels being made, because Hugh is always making barrels, and the sound of his hammer has become one of the settlement's familiar sounds, as much a part of Plymouth as the wind off the bay and the bell that calls the community to meeting. Thomas and Agnes sit by their fire in the evenings, and the house smells of herbs, and Ned is usually nearby, whittling or mending or simply sitting in the warmth, and there is a peace in this small room that Thomas did not think he would ever feel again. He does not talk about Nottinghamshire any more. He does not talk about Leiden. He talks about the garden and the fishing and whether the thatch needs patching before the snow comes. And these conversations are the sweetest music he knows because they are the conversations of people who are home. Agnes looks at her herb garden, which is sleeping now under a layer of straw she has laid down for protection, and she thinks about the rosemary she brought from England, which did not survive the crossing, and the chamomile she learned about in Leiden, which did, and the new plants she has found here, growing wild in a landscape that she is only beginning to understand. She thinks about all the gardens she has tended in her life, the one in Scrooby, the one in Leiden, this one, and she understands that a garden is never finished. It is always becoming. You plant what you can, and you tend what grows, and you learn from what doesn't, and you keep going. Susanna walks to the top of the hill sometimes in the late afternoon and looks out over the bay. The water is gray now, with the coming of winter, and the sky meets it at a line so faint you cannot quite tell where one ends and the other begins. She does not think about Leiden very much anymore. She does not think about the cheese seller in the market or the sound of the Peterskirk bell. She thinks about this place, which is hers now, hers and Hugh's, and her father's, and the Marshes, and Ned's, and Samuel's, and all the others who are still alive and still here and still building. She has not resolved her questions about faith. She may never resolve them, and this no longer frightens her. She has discovered something that is not certainty and not doubt, but something between them, a willingness to live with open hands, to receive what comes, to be grateful without needing to understand why. It is not her father's faith, and it is not her father's doubt. It is her own, and it is enough. Elias closes his record book for the day and sets down his pen. The book is thick now, thicker than he expected, filled with the names and dates and details of a community's first year. He runs his fingers over the pages and feels the roughness of the paper and the slight indentation of the ink. And he thinks about all the things he has recorded and all the things he hasn't. The conversations too quiet to overhear, the kindnesses too small to name, the slow, invisible work of people learning to live together across the lines that once divided them. He thinks about the press in Choir Lane, and the pamphlets he set with such care, and the belief he held so fiercely that words could change the world. He still believes it, but he understands now that the most important words are not the ones printed on paper. They are the ones spoken at supper in the garden beside a sickbed. They are the words that say, "You are welcome here. You belong. We are one people." And now the day is ending in Plymouth, and the light is going, and the settlement grows quiet. The fires are banked. The doors are closed against the cold. The last sounds of the evening, a mother hushing a child, the scrape of a stool being pushed back from a table, the distant rhythmic knock of Hugh's hammer shaping one final stave, fade into the larger silence of the land. Thomas and Agnes lie beside each other in the narrow bed they built together, and the wool blanket is rough and warm, and the house smells of chamomile and wood smoke, and neither of them speaks because they do not need to. Ned sleeps on his pallet near the fire, curled on his side, his breathing slow and steady, his face smooth in the firelight, all the wariness gone from it in sleep. Susanna stands at the window of her father's house and watches the stars. They are different here than they were in Leiden, brighter, more numerous, as though the sky itself were wider in this new place. She does not know what tomorrow will bring. She does not need to. Samuel Wynne puts away his instruments and closes his log, and he sits for a moment in the quiet of the common house, listening to the wind, and he is tired in the way that a man is tired after a long day of good work, deeply, thoroughly, peacefully, and Elias Holbrook sets down his pen and folds his hands and is still. The settlement sleeps. The bay holds the last of the light. The stars turn slowly overhead, indifferent and eternal, and the year that began with leaving and loss has come to rest here, in this small collection of houses on a hill above the water, where ordinary people have done the extraordinary work of building a life from nothing